Okay, the reading for this week is Minase Sangin Hyakuin by Sōgi, Sōchō, and Shōhaku. And the translation for this work is Three Poets at Minase. And the work is an example of Hyakuin renga, or a 100-verse renga sequence. And there's so much to talk about in this regarding this work that I decided to divide the lecture into two lectures. So for this lecture, I will simply be reading the questions on your study guide that you will need to answer in depth and submit to me. And then I will do a recitation of the entire 100-verse sequence. Okay, and the work was composed in 1488. I have all the background information at the beginning of the study guide, and I will discuss that in the next video. So for this video, I will simply read the original Japanese, the translation by Stephen Carter. By the way, Stephen Carter does a translation of this work, and he included it in his traditional Japanese poetry, an anthology published in 1991, so we'll be using that translation. And then I will start with the study guide questions. Okay, so let us move to... Okay, so just keep in mind that some of these questions might be a little bit unclear, but most of the problems will be resolved when you after listening to the second part of this lecture on this work. Okay, so come back in a few days. I should have the second lecture uploaded by tomorrow, hopefully. Okay, study questions. Number 1. Note the topical categories, or dai, of each poem. Category or categories, the dai. Dai is a key word that I will explain in the second lecture video. Of each poem, note them, which I have indicated beside each poem. Okay, so I've included the dai in with each poem from 1 to 100. How does the dai progression unfold in the course of the sequence? Okay, which dai are featured most prominently? Okay, so in the beginning of the study guide, I have an explanation of all the major dai, and you will need to read that. Do the poets follow the shikimoku, another key term that I explained at the beginning of the study guide, and I will explain in the next video. Do the poets follow the shikimoku, or the rules and conventions, regarding the use of seasonal dai? Explain. Okay. Number 2. Stephen Carter, who translated this work sequence, notes that, and I quote, all linked verse sequences are highly allusive. In the general sense, because the vocabulary of the genre is mostly borrowed from the uta tradition. Uta is his word for waka. Right, uta, waka, tanka, all the same thing. Borrowed from the uta tradition, and more specifically, because poets constantly draw on the resources of famous poets of the past. Okay, so the question here then, or the assignment is, make a list of all the literary allusions, echoes of previous works, and instances of intertextuality that appear in the work. Describe their functions and meanings. When and where do the poets refer to previous works? Why? Are the allusions to past Chinese poems or stories, or to canonized Japanese poems and stories? What is the relationship of the previous poem to the new poem? Okay, so the classical canonized poem to the new poem. So it's basically a question about the allusions that appear in this 100-verse sequence, and there are many. Okay, number 3. What is the ratio of seasonal verses, or kinoku, to miscellaneous verses, zonoku, in Minase Sangin Hyakuin? Okay, so I explained this at the beginning of the study guide. The two major categories of verses are kinoku, or kisetsu, right, seasonal verses, and miscellaneous, zonoku. Miscellaneous verses is also translated as, zonoku is also translated as non-season verses. All right, what is the ratio of spring-autumn verses to summer-winter verses? How do these ratios compare to the ratios that we saw in Matsuo Basho's Kasen Ichinakawa? What is the meaning and significance of these ratios? Explain. Okay. So you remember that in my video on Matsuo Basho's Ichinakawa, I explained how spring and autumn stanzas are much more prominent than summer and winter stanzas. So in the Japanese tradition, spring and autumn are the most important seasons. Summer and winter are important to a lesser degree. All right. That's number 3. Number 4. Describe the various stanza types found in this work. Okay, the various connections, links. Alright, let's do that one again. Number 4. Describe the various types of links, the various links and connections with tsukei or kakari found in the work. And kakari and tsukei are two very important terms in the context of renga that I explained at the beginning of this study guide. I will discuss those in video number 2. So what are the connections, the links found in this work? Which stanzas are shinku, or closely related, closely linked stanzas, which are soku? So shinku, soku, these are terms that I will discuss in the next video. Closely linked stanzas and remotely linked stanzas. Are shinku or soku more prevalent? Keep in mind that the meaning of one verse will change depending on what follows it. Okay? Here are some examples of the link types I have found, and elaborate and add to this list. Okay? So, for example, here's some that I found. The maiku is the preceding stanza, right? And to the maiku, the next poet adds the tsukeku, the added stanza. Okay? So every verse, every stanza in the 100 stanza sequence, except for stanza 1 and stanza 100, are both maiku and tsukeku. Okay, I'll explain more about that in the next video. So here's some of the links that I found. An abstract idea is presented, and then in the next tsukeku, we find the concrete instantiation of that idea, right? That's one type of link that I found. Another type is a phenomenon, a certain phenomenon is presented, and then we get in the next one a causal explanation of that phenomenon, of why that phenomenon exists, right? So this is a inga kanke example, right? Causal explanation. Showers. For another example is showers. You'll see in the maiku, the image of a rain shower, and then that is suddenly transformed into tears, which is kind of similar, right? They're both wet and watery. So showers in the maiku becomes tears in the next one. And this is an example of a thing that morphs into another thing that shares similar attributes. All right. Another type of link that I found is distant past will suddenly shift to the present or to the future, a sudden temporal leap or shift. Another example, Q, a question is posed and then the answer is given in the next stanza. So Q and then the A. Or alternately, the A is provided, the answer is provided first, and then we get the question in the next stanza. Alright? Another is a phenomenon, to say the moon is presented in the maiku, and then suddenly we have human beings appear on the scene and say, hey, let's go look at the moon. So this is an example, this is a kind of expansion of a scene, or a dramatization of a scene that didn't have any humans in it. Right? The next is frost on an old man's head appears in one of the stanzas, and then at the next stanza, the tsukeku, we see the frost is transplanted from the old man's head onto a crane. Okay, so this I call the image, an image transplanted to another host or scene. Okay, autumn, another example of the link is autumn stanza is given, and then we see an intra-seasonal progression. So autumn, early autumn for example, progresses into late autumn, right? So this is an example. We don't see a jump of season, we stay within the same season, but we see a progression to a moment later in that season. Impermanence observed in one phenomenon, mujō, right? That's a very important term that I'll discuss in the next video. Impermanence observed in one phenomenon, and that same mujō, or impermanence, is then observed in another phenomenon, in the tsukeku, right? In other words, the locus or subject of the experience of impermanence shifts from thing A to thing B. A warbler, here's an example that appears in the sequence. A warbler won't sing, and then, so we have a human in the maiku complaining about a warbler not singing, and then in the next tsukeku stanza we see an answer, sort of a reply, from the perspective of the warbler, saying that I won't sing because I don't want to disturb the blossoms. So we see a shift from human perspective to nature perspective. Okay? So these are just some of the examples that I found of the links between maiku and a tsukeku. but you will want to find others. And keep in mind that some of them are very, very subtle, and it might not be so apparent at first what the actual link is. Okay, number 5 is a simple question about the kireji, which I have explained already in previous videos, and I will explain again in the next video. Identify all the kireji, the cutting words, that appear in the work. Explain their significance and function. And some of the examples of their functions include juxtaposition, emphasis, a sort of emotional exclamation from the speaker or the persona, conjecture, a rhetorical question, and so forth. Okay, so how are the cutting words being used in this sequence? And I will give a list of the various kinds of, the major kinds of kireji in the beginning of the study guide. Number 6, renga sequences are characterized by constant change, ceaseless flow, fluidity, movement, interpenetration. Scenes, personae, and natural phenomena are always morphing into something else, depending on what follows in the next verse. A high or lofty image or idea will suddenly transform into something low or common. A woman will suddenly turn into a man. A contemporary figure will suddenly metamorphose into a figure from antiquity. And an image from one setting will suddenly be uprooted and transplanted into another setting. Explain how this sense of flow and movement is achieved in the Minase 100 stanza sequence. Okay. So this is, and when I talk about this, I often bring up the example of the Michael Jackson video, Black or White, which had a sort of 50-second sequence in which probably 15 or 20 humans appear, and they all kind of blend into the next person. So person A appears, and then their characteristics kind of blur into the next person. And then we see a blurring into the next person, so that nobody remains stable for more than a second or two. And that's kind of the same effect that we see in renga sequence. A sort of short, fragmented image or scene will appear, and then that is transformed into something else via what appears in the next stanza. Okay, so that question number 6 is basically about that. Explain how that sense of flow, of movement, of never returning to the past, never making a full circle, of always moving forward in some way, how that sense of movement appears in this work. Number 7, is it possible to extract a larger narrative from this sequence, as we did in Matsuo Basho's Kasen Ichi Nakawa? Right? So we wrote, one of the questions for that from that study guide was to write a one-page long sort of paraphrase of the summary that can be extracted, the plot that can be extracted from the larger work. Plot's probably the wrong word, but the sort of larger general narrative. If this is possible, write a brief summary or paraphrase of the entire 100 stanza sequence. Keep in mind the above noted rule about how a verse or a stanza disappears the moment its tsukeku or added verse receives its own tsukeku, even while the flow of the whole sequence is maintained. Alright, and the word for this is uchikoshi, I think. Right? So you see a maiku is followed by the tsukeku. The moment the tsukeku appears, the uchikoshi, which is the previous verse, right, the second previous stanza, suddenly disappears. Right? So when you write a tsukeku, when you write tsukeku to the maiku, you can never refer back to the one that precedes the maiku. That must disappear the moment the tsukeku is written. Okay, I'll explain more about this in video number 2. But the question is about a possible. So even though the uchikoshi disappears the moment the tsukeku is composed, there still is kind of a lingering flow of the entire whole, right, that forms a kind of vague, nebulous narrative. And this question is about that. Number 8. Note how the meaning of one stanza is often transformed or altered by what follows in the next stanza. So find 3 examples of such transformations, in other words, 3 maiku plus tsukeku verse links, and describe how the maiku's meaning is altered by what follows in the tsukeku. Right? So when the maiku exists by itself, before the tsukeku is composed, you might have a certain image of what it means. And then the other poet comes along, writes the tsukeku, and sort of refashions the meaning of the maiku in a different direction. So suddenly, the meaning of the maiku is given a new context, and the meaning itself shifts. So this question is explain some 3 examples of how that shift in meaning occurs. Number 9. Find all the kigo, the seasonal words that appear in the work. You will need to review Yamamoto Kenchiki's list of 500 essential Japanese season words, which we discussed in a previous assignment. See the link there? I have the link there. Also review my videos on kigo, on the seasonal words. Okay, so find the seasonal words in this work and describe them. Simple question. Number 10. Can you find any haikai words, haikaigo, in Minase Sangin Hyakuin? Haikai words or haikaigo are non-standard, non-poetic, non-aristocratic, vernacular words that are not typically found in the waka of the 21 official imperial classical anthologies known as the Nijuichi Daishu. Okay? So these are the classical anthologies from Heian period, and there are 21 in all, beginning in the Heian period, starting with the Kokinshu. And there are 21 in all, and the words that appear in those works become the standard diction for poetry. However, with renga, you see an increasing use of non-standard words, or haikaigo. Okay, non-poetic is probably the wrong word there, but you see what I mean, I think. Alright, are there any kango, Chinese words, or Sinitic words in this work? Okay, so the 21 classical imperial anthologies of waka generally do not include kango, or only very rarely. However, with renga, and even more so when we get to haikai renga, we see an increasing use of Chinese words, or kango. Do we find any in this work? If so, locate them and explain their context and their settings. Explain their significance and overall effect. Okay, number 11. Waka and renga poems are sometimes classified into 2 categories called ninjō no ku, or person stanzas, and ninjō nashi no ku, or non-person stanzas, also known as ba no ku, or place stanzas. So these are 2 ways of categorizing waka and renga poems. Ninjō no ku and ninjō nashi no ku. Okay, ninjō stanzas are further divided into 3 types: ji, ta, and jitahan. Ji are the first-person stanzas. Ta, other or third-person stanzas. And jitahan is a combination of self and other stanzas. I think I discussed these briefly in my Introduction to Renga Poetry video. Classify each of the 100 stanzas in this work that we're reading today according to these categories. Are most of them ninjō no ku, or are they ninjō nashi no ku? This is a fairly simple task, right? You just have to look at the ku, find out if there is a human in there somewhere. If there is, it's a ninjō no ku. If there is no human to be felt or found or seen or perceived anywhere in that poem, in that stanza, it is then a ninjō nashi no ku. Classify each of these. Are there more ninjō no ku or ninjō nashi no ku in this work? Explain. Number 12. This is about the hana no jōza, right? Where do the seat or place of the blossom, the hana no jōza, right? In haikai, in kasen, I think we called it hana no za, but in renga it was still called hana no jōza. The seat or the place of the blossom, where do these appear in this work? In what context do they appear? Do their locations or positions conform to the shikimoku, the rules? Remember, shikimoku means the rules or conventions of renga, and they have specific guidelines about where the hana no jōza is to appear in the sequence. Does this work that we're reading today conform to those rules? Explain. Number 13. Same question, but with tsuki no jōza. So hana no jōza was the seat of the blossoms. Tsuki no jōza refers to the seat or place of the moon, right? So note all the seats of the moon that appear in this work. In what verses do they appear? What numbers do they appear? What do they bring to the scene? Describe their functions, significance, and effects. Number 14. Find all the love-themed stanzas and sequences. Alright, the koi. Koi is one of the major themes of traditional waka, right? Koi, I think, had 5 full chapters in the Kokinshu. And that sort of prominence of the koi theme, the erotic love theme, carried on with renga as well. So we see many koi-themed stanzas and sequences in this work as well. Find them. What other topics and themes, or topics, do they appear in tandem with? Right? So keep in mind that a koi-themed stanza will also have another dai alongside it in the same stanza. How long does each love sequence last? There are specific rules about this. A love sequence cannot go on for more than 5 or 6, I think it's 5, stanzas in a row, right? You can't see koi, 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 and then another koi. It usually stops at 5 at the most. What aspects or poetic essences, hongi, another term that I explained at the beginning of the study guide, of love are being emphasized, right? Okay, so love can be many things. Erotic love can mean many things to different humans, but that doesn't really matter in the context of traditional Japanese poetry and medieval renga linked poetry. Right? Love, koi, has certain hong-i, or poetic essences and associations that always accompany it. For example, love is unrequited a lot of the times, right? One person will love the other, but that love will not be returned. Erotic longing is another aspect of love that is considered essential in traditional poetry. Pangs of jealousy, the joys of consummated love during the spring, especially in summer, well, summer more specifically. The spring is usually associated with the courtship process, and then that is consummated in the summer. And then in the aki, in the autumn, you see the sorrows of parting, which is another theme of love. Who are the characters, the subjects, the personae of these love verses? Okay, so keep in mind that the poet is not talking about himself in nearly all cases, right? So Japanese traditional waka and renga linked verse is very different from modern romantic poetry, where the poet expresses his own feelings, his own desires, and so forth. This is a kind of fictional space that the poet enters and uses various characters and personae and subjects and role-playing to express poetic ideas and so forth. Do the settings, context, and personae suddenly shift when the next line or tsukeku is composed? Explain. Okay, so keep in mind the point that I mentioned above, that namely that person A in the maiku can suddenly shift to a completely different person depending on what comes in the following tsukeku stanza. Okay, number 15. As you read the 100 verses, make a list of the various personae and speakers that appear and disappear throughout the work. Remember that renga linked verse is highly stylized and fictionalized. It is very different from the autobiographical or self-expressionistic modes found in, say, modern romantic poetry. Discuss how the identities of the speakers and personae shift depending on what comes next. Okay, so this question is kind of an extension of the previous question. And I give an example, verses 72 to 73, for example. Okay, 72 has a kind of suggested meaning when you read that by itself or in relation to the one that precedes it. Then you read 73, and suddenly the meaning shifts. The meaning of 72 shifts. Number 16. Find all the instances of the word the world, yo. How many times does this word yo appear? In what context? Do the 3 poets follow the prescribed shikimoku rules regarding when and how often the word yo can appear? Are the yo verses sufficiently separated? What sort of world is being described in each instance? Okay, so there can be many different types of worlds. The use of the word yo can connote very different things depending on the context and how it's used. Is the word yo that appears an ukiyo, written with the kanji for uku, to float, a buoyant or floating world, which has certain connotations? Is it an ukiyo written with a different kanji for sad or unbearable? Are there any references to the archetypal Yostebito that appears a lot in wakas, which means a world-renouncing hermit. I think we see this word used at least once in this 100-verse sequence, Yostebito. If so, what type of world is implied by that word, Yostebito? Or is there some other kind of yo? Explain. Okay, so it's just a general question about the various yo that appear in this work. And keep in mind that there are also shikimoku related to this word yo. When it can be used, how many times it can be used, how much space has to separate the uses from each other, and so forth. Number 17, the final question. Buddhism is fundamental to the art of renga. This is probably the most important question, actually. Number 17. Buddhism is fundamental to the art of renga linked verse and to Muromachi aesthetics in general. What Buddhist themes, images, or ideas can you find in this work? And here's a hint that I give you. Think about the notions of impermanence, mujō, attachment, shuchaku, release, escape, liberation, gedatsu, enlightenment, satori, nirvana, nehan, the Buddhist law, nori, or written with the kanji ho, non-self, the idea of non-self, or anatman in Sanskrit, muga in Japanese, the doctrine of dependent origination, engisetsu, worldly desires, bonno, transmigration or reincarnation, rinne, and so forth. So a lot of these you will find in this 100-verse sequence. Okay, so find them and describe what is going on in those stanzas. In what context do these Buddhist themes and ideas appear? Are the poems suggesting or promoting certain philosophical or didactic messages? Explain. Okay. And what is arguably the most Buddhist thing about renga is the idea of links, right? Nothing ever stays the same. All things are interpenetrating and interlinked. Everything is always morphing from one thing to the next. What appears to be a set meaning in a certain stanza will suddenly shift to something else depending on what follows. So the very nature of the renga form has sort of Buddhist underpinnings, philosophical or metaphysical underpinnings, you might say. All right, that's the end of the study guide. 16 questions in all. Answer those to the best of your 17 questions, 17 in all. Answer those to the best of your ability. Now I will read. First, I'll take a break because I'm about to pass out, and then I will read the entire 100-verse sequence. Minase Sangin Hyakuin, 3 poets at Minase, composed 1488 by Sōgi, Sōchō, and Shōhaku. Okay, the translation we are using is by Stephen Carter. Okay, let's take a short break and I will be back in 1 minute. Alright, note that beneath many of the stanzas I have a little asterisk star and then an explanation of either an allusion to a previous poem, for example from the Kokinshu or the Shinkokinshu or so forth, and also an explanation of the links. Okay, so how that specific stanza relates to the previous one. And most of these asterisks, probably 90% of them, are about links. Okay, and how there's sort of little hints or explanations about how that stanza relates to the previous one. I'm not going to read all of those because that would just take forever, but they are included in your manuscript here that you're using. So make sure you grasp how each stanza relates to the previous one. Okay, and the notes there should help you. So what I'm going to read now is the Japanese, the name of the poet, the dai, right? The spring, furimono sanri, and these terms, furimono sanri, seihen, kyosho, spring, haru, and so forth, I will explain in video too. For now, I will just state them. But they are the dai for that particular stanza. Okay, so there are 4 sheets in all, right? For a hyakuin. Remember in kasen sequence, we have 2 sheets total, right? Here we have 4 sheets, or kaishi is the name of the fancy paper that the poets would use. Here we have 4 in all, and they use both sides of the paper, remember? The omote and the ura, okay? So here is the first of the 4 sheets, the front side, called the Shōori no omote, Okay, and on this front of the first sheet, we have the title or the foreword, plus the 8 verses of the jo, preface. Remember, we have the rhythmical pattern is used here, jo, ha, kyu. I'll explain that in video 2, and that's included in your study guide here. So now I will recite the entire sequence. Okay, starting here. Poem number 1. Stanza number 1. I'll call them stanzas from now on. Alright, remember these stanzas by themselves are incomplete. Right? A stanza 1 needs stanza 2 to link it together to form a complete waka. Right? By themselves, they don't form a complete waka. Right? They're only a 5-7-5 or a 7-7. To be a complete waka, you need 5-7-5 plus 7-7, or 7-7 plus 5-7-5. Alright, number 1. Yuki nagara yama moto kasumu yube kana. That's the opening stanza, or the hokku to this sequence. By Sōgi. Spring, furimono, sanri, and the tai form of sanri. Sanri has 2 types, tai and yo. Carter's translation: some snow still remains as haze moves low on the slopes toward evening. Stanza 2 by Shōhaku. Yuku mizu toku梅匂う里. Spring, suihen, yo, the yo type of suihen. Ki, kyosho, the tai type of kyosho. Flowing water far away, and a plum-scented village. Stanza 3 by Sōchō. Spring, suihen, the tai form, and ki. Kawa ni hito mu ra柳春見えて. Wind off the river blows through a clump of willows, and spring appears. Stanza 4 by Sōgi. No season, or miscellaneous. Suihen, tai yo hoka, and yabun. And the stanza is船さす音もしるき明け方. A boat being pulled along, sounding clear at break of day. Stanza 5 by Shōhaku. Autumn, hikarimono, yabun, sobikimono. Tsuki ya na hokiri wataru yo ni nokoru ran. Still there somewhere, the moon off behind the mist, traversing the night. Stanza 6 by Sōchō. Autumn, furimono.霜置く野原秋は暮れけり. Out on frost-laden fields, autumn has come to its end. Stanza 7 by Sōgi. Autumn, mushi, kusa. Naku mushi no kokoro to mo naku草枯れて. With no care at all for the insects crying out, grasses wither away. Stanza 8 by Shōhaku. No season, kyosho, the tai form. Kakine o toへばあらはなる道. Pay a visit, and by the fence, a path standing in the open. Okay, that's the end of the front side of the first sheet. Next, we have the reverse side of the first sheet, or the shoori no ura. And this side holds the first 14 verses of the ha, or the slow development section. Okay, stanza 9 by Sōchō. No season. Sanri, the tai form. Kyosho, the tai form. Yamafukaki sato ya arashi ni okuru ran. So deep in the hills, the village spends all its time amidst rough winds. Stanza 10 by Sōgi. No season, or miscellaneous. Zo. Nare nu sumai zo寂しさも憂き. If you're not used to the life, the solitude is hard to bear. Stanza 11 by Shōhaku. No season. Jinrin 10回. いまさらに 一人ある身を思うなよ. No more of that now. This is no time to lament that you are alone. Stanza 12 by Sōchō. No season, 10回. 移ろはむとはかねて知らずや. Have you not learned before this that all things must always change? Stanza 13 by Sōgi. Spring, 降り物、植物、無常。置きわぶる露こそ花にあはれなれ. Do trying in vain to form on cherry blossoms, a pitiful sight. Stanza 14 by Shōhaku. Spring, 光り物。まだ残る日の打ちかさむ影. Still some sunlight remains, faint rays shining through the haze. Stanza 15 by Sōchō. Spring, 鳥。暮れぬとや、泣きつつ鳥の帰るらん. Has nightfall come? Birds cry out above, making their way toward home. Stanza 16 by Sōgi. No season. Sanri, Tai, the Tai form. Tabi. 三山を行けば湧く空もなし. So far into the hills, there's no sky to show the way. Stanza 17 by Shōhaku. Winter, 降り物、衣装、旅。春る間も袖はしぐれの旅衣. A break in the storm, but still showers on the sleeves of a travel robe. Stanza 18 by Sōchō. Autumn, 光り物、夜分、旅。我が草枕、月ややつさん. Here on a pillow of grass, the moonlight seems like a waste. Stanza 19 by Sōgi. Autumn, 夜分、恋。いたずらに明かすよ多く秋更けて. For too many nights the time has gone by in vain, autumn deepening. Stanza 20 by Shōhaku. Autumn, 夜分、草、恋。夢に恨むる荻の上風. Must it interrupt my dreams? This hateful wind in the reeds? Stanza 21 by Sōchō. No season, Jinrin. 西はみな、ふるさと人の跡もなし. All there was to see were sad remnants of my home, people I once knew. Stanza 22 by Sōgi. No season, 10回. 老いの行方よ、何にかからん. Up ahead in my old age, what will I rely on then? Okay, that's the end of the reverse side of the first sheet. Now we have the front side of the second sheet, the ni no ori no omote. And it holds 14 verses, starting with stanza number 23 by Shōhaku. No season, 10回. 色もなきことの葉をだにあわれしで. So without color are these verses of mine, yet some solace still. Stanza 24 by Sōgi. No season. それもともなる夕暮れの空. This too can serve as a friend, the sky as dusk descends. Stanza 25 by Sōchō. Spring, sobikimono, sanri, the Tai form. 雲に今日花散り発る峰越えて. Today clouds replace the blossoms that scattered, crossing a peak. Stanza 26 by Shōhaku. Spring, tori. 聞けば今はの春の針金. The time has come. I hear the call of wild geese in spring. Stanza 27 by Sōgi. Spring, hikarimono, yabun, jinrin. Oboroge no tsukikawa hitomo mate shibashi. A dim moon, yes, but obscure in its beauty? Wait a moment. See. Stanza 28 by Sōchō. Autumn, furimono, yabun. Karine no tsuyu no aki no akebono. A brief sleep, vagrant as dew, then faint light of autumn dawn. Stanza 29 by Shōhaku. Autumn, kyosho, the Tai form, and sobikimono. Sue no naru sato wa haruka ni kiri tachite. At the field's far edge stands a village distantly, where mist is rising. Stanza 30 by Sōgi. Autumn, isho. Fukikuru kaze wa koromo utsu koe. Carried by on passing wind, the sound of mallet on cloth. Stanza 31 by Sōchō. Autumn, jinrin, isho. Sayuru himo. Miwa sode usuki kure goto ni. Even on cold days, I have only these thin sleeves every nightfall. Stanza 32 by Shōhaku. No season, sanri, the Tai form, 10 Tanomu mo hakana, tsumagi toru yama. An uncertain livelihood in the hills gathering wood. Stanza 33 by Sōgi. No season, 10 Saritomo no kono yo no michi wa tsuki hatete. I had not lost hope, but now my way through the world has come to nothing. Stanza 34 by Sōchō. No season. Kokoro bososhi ya izuchi yukamashi. What a wretched situation. Is there nothing left to go? Nowhere left to go? Stanza 35 by Shōhaku. No season, yabun, koi. Inochi no mi, matsu koto ni suru kinu ginu ni. The end of my life, that is all I can wait for, the morning after. Stanza 36 by Sōgi. No season, jinrin, koi. Nao nani nare ya, hito no koishiki. What could be the cause of it, that I should feel such love again? Okay, that's the end of that sheet, of that side of the sheet. Now we have the reverse side of sheet 2, called the ni no ori no ura. And this reverse side holds 14 verses, starting with stanza 37 by Sōchō. No season, jinrin, koi. Kimi o okite, akazu mo tare o omou ran. While I still have you, why think of anyone else? Why this discontent? Stanza 38 by Shōhaku. No season, koi. Sono omokage ni nitaru dani nashi. No resemblance do I see to that other countenance. Stanza 39 by Sōgi. No season, uemono 10 Kusaki sae furuki miyako no urami nite. The shrubs, the grasses, even these long bitterly for the old capital. Stanza 40 by Sōchō. No season, jinrin, kyosho, the Tai form, and 10 Mi o uki yado mo nagori koso arde. Even here in my house of pain, I still have some attachments. Stanza 41 by Shōhaku. No season, jinrin, 10 Tadachine no to karanu ato ni nagusame yo. Before time passes, remember your parent fondly, and take comfort now. Stanza 42 by Sōgi. No season. Tsukihi no sue ya yume ni meguramu. Days, months move toward their ends, rolling on as in a dream. Stanza 43 by Sōchō. No season, suihen, the Tai form, and tabi. Kono kishi yo, morokoshi bunne no kagiri nite. もろこし、この岸よ、もろこし船の限りにて。Leaving this shore, a boat stops for its last stop before far Cathay. Stanza 44 by Shōhaku, no season, Shakkyo. Mata umare konu nori yo kikabaya. Ah, to hear of a law that could free one from rebirth. Stanza 45 by Sōgi, autumn, furimono. Ao made to omoi no tsuyu no kie kaeri. Till we meet again, like dew my feelings languish only to return. Stanza 46 by Sōchō, autumn, jindin koi. Mio aki kaze mo hito da no me nari. Though wearied by autumn wind, I go on with the deception. Stanza 47 by Shōhaku, autumn, mushi, kusa, koi. Matsumushi no naku ne kai naki yomogyu ni. Of no use at all, the call of the pine cricket from wormwood tangles. Stanza 48 by Sōgi, autumn, sandi, Thai version, Thai form. Hikarimono, yabun. Shimeyu yamaba, tsuki no mizo sumu. Rope cordons mark the mountain where only the moon resides. Stanza 49 by Sōchō, no season, yabun, 10回. Kane ni wa ga tada aramashi no nezame shite. A bell sounds and I see what's there ahead of me, unable to sleep. Stanza 50 by Shōhaku, winter, yabun, furimono, 10回. Itadaki keri na yona no shimo. How thick it lies on the head, this frost, night after night. Okay, so that's the end of the reverse side of sheet number 2. Now we begin the front side of the third sheet, called the San no Ori no Mote, which holds 14 verses. Stanza 51 by Sōgi, winter, tori, suihen, the Thai form. Fuyugare no ashitazu wabite tateru e ni. In winter's blight stands a somber crane in reeds by a little cove. Stanza 52 by Shōhaku, no season, suihen, the Thai form, jin, ding. Yushi o kaze no okitsufu nabito. In the tide wind at nightfall, boatmen out in the offing. Stanza 53 by Sōchō, spring, sobikimono. Yukue naki kasumi ya izuku hate nadan. Drifting aimlessly, the haze spreads out and away, but toward what end? Stanza 54 by Sōgi, spring, sandi, the Thai form. Kyosho, the Thai form. Kuru kata mienu yamazato no haru. You can't see where it came from. Spring in a mountain village. Stanza 55 by Shōhaku, spring, uemono. Shigemi yori taedae nokoru hana ochite. Among green branches, a trickle of late blossoms falling to earth. Stanza 56 by Sōchō, autumn, ki. Kono moto wakuru michi no tsuyu kesa. Parting the way beneath trees, a pathway heavy with dew. Stanza 57 by Sōgi, autumn. Aki wa nado, moranu iwaya mo shiguru ran. It's autumn, true, but how can my dry rock house admit rain showers? Stanza 58 by Shōhaku, autumn, hikarimono, yabun, isho, shakkyo. Koke no tamoto mo tsuki wa nare keri. Here I am in sleeves of moss, yet still the moon seems at ease. Stanza 59 by Sōchō, no season, jindin, shakkyo. Kokoro aru kagiri zo shiruki yosute bito. Now we discover how devoted is the heart of the recluse. Stanza 60 by Sōgi. No season, suihen, the yo form. Tabi. Osamaru nami ni fune izuru miyu. Over waves now at peace, a boat seen rowing away. Stanza 61 by Shōhaku. No season, sobikimono. Asanagi no sora ni ato naki yoru no kumo. In morning calm, the sky retains not a trace of last night's clouds. Stanza 62 by Sōchō. Winter, furimono sandi, the Thai form. Yuki ni sayakeki yomo no toyama. In snow, how bright is the gleam of far mountains all around. Stanza 63 by Sōgi. Winter, sandi, the Thai form. Kyosho, the Thai form. Ki. Mine no iyo, kono ha no nochi mo sumiyaka de. Never do I tire of life in my mountaintop hut, even after the leaves. Stanza 64 by Shōhaku. No season. Ki. Sabisa nadau matsu kaze no koe. One learns to bear solitude from the sound of the pine wind. Alright, that's the end of the front side of sheet 3. Now we have the reverse side of sheet 3, called the San no Ori no Ura, and this holds another 14 verses, starting with stanza 65 by Sōchō. No season, Jindin, Yabun, Shakkyo. Tarde ka kono akatsuki oki yo kasanemashi. Who besides myself might be arising at dawn, time upon time? Stanza 66 by Sōgi. Autumn, Hikarimono, Yabun, Tabi. Tsuki wa shiru ya no tabi zo ha kanashiki. Only the moon could know this, how sad one is on a journey. Stanza 67 by Shōhaku. Autumn, furimono, isho. Tsuyu fukami, shimo sae shiyoru, aki no sode. Already dew-laden, and now frost too withers them, my autumn sleeves. Stanza 68 by Sōchō. Autumn, kusa. Usu hana susuki, chiramaku mo oshi. Plumes on flowering miscanthus. What a shame that they must fall. Stanza 69 by Sōgi. Autumn, tori, sandi, the Thai form. Uzurda naku, katayama kurete samuki hi ni. A quail cries out where dusk falls beyond a cliff on a cold day. Stanza 70 by Shōhaku. No season, Kyosho, the Thai form. 10回. Noto naru sato mo wabi tsutsu zo sumu. Once a village, now a field, but the lonely life goes on. Stanza 71 by Sōchō. No season, Jindin koi. Kairi koba, machishi omoi yo hito yamin. If he should return, he will see how patiently I have waited. Stanza 72 by Sōgi. No season, Jindin koi. Utoki mo tarde ga kokoro naru beki. Whose heart could it possibly be to feel itself so aloof? Stanza 73 by Shōhaku. No season, koi. Mukashi yori tada ayaniku no koi no michi. Since the beginning, it has been untrustworthy, the way of love. Stanza 74 by Sōchō. No season, koi. Wasurade gataki yosae urameshi. That it will not stay forgotten makes you hate the world the more. Stanza 75 by Sōgi. No season, Jindin. Yamagatsu ni nado haru aki no shidarudan. Living in the hills, what knowledge should one have of springs and autumns? Stanza 76 by Shōhaku. No season, kusa, kyosho, the Thai form. Ue nuku saba no shigeki shibano to. Grasses that no one planted, rank around a brushwood door. Stanza 77 by Sōchō, Spring, Kyōshō, the Thai form. Katawara ni kakiyo no arada kaishishite. Alongside a fence, fallow paddies left behind, only half plowed. Stanza 78 by Sōgi, Spring, Jinding, Furimono. Yuku hito kasumu ame no kuregata. A man goes walking away, hazy in the evening rain. Okay, so that's the end of sheet 3. Now we have the fourth and final sheet. Here's the front side, which holds another 14 verses of the ha, or development section. This is called the nagori no omote, the front side of the nagori, the final fourth sheet. Starting with stanza 79 by Sōchō, Spring, Tori. Yadori sen no ugu isu ya itou ran. The place where I stopped for shelter, the bush warbler no longer likes. Stanza 80 by Shōhaku, Spring, Yabun, Tori. Sayo mo shizuka ni sakura saku kage. Ah, the stillness of the night, beneath cherry trees in bloom. Stanza 81 by Sōgi, Spring, Yabun, Uemono. Toboshibi yo somukuru hana ni ake somete. Lamp turned aside, I look to blossoms for my light, day about to break. Stanza 82 by Sōchō, Spring, Jinding, Koi. Taga tamakura ni yume wa mieken. Who will it be, a dreaming now? That fine arm for a pillow. Stanza 83 by Shōhaku, no season, Koi. Chigiri haya, omoi taetsutsu toshi mo hennu. I gave up all thought of seeing that pledge fulfilled as the years went by. Stanza 84 by Sōgi, no season, Sandri, the Thai form, Jukkai. Ima wa no yowai yama motazu neji. At such an age, who can hope for a visit to the hills? Stanza 85 by Sōchō, no season, Jinding, Jukkai. Kakusumi yo, hito wa naki ni mo nashitsudan. So thoroughly have I hid myself away, they'll think I'm dead. Stanza 86 by Shōhaku, no season, Jukkai. Sate mo ukiyo ni kakaru tama no. Still it hangs on in the world, this jewel string that is my life. Stanza 87 by Sōgi, no season, Ki, Sobikimono. Matsu no ha o tada asayu no keburi nite. Needles from the pines, every morning, every evening, going up in smoke. Stanza 88 by Sōchō, no season, Sihen, the Thai form, Kyōshō, the Thai form. Uraba no sato yo ika ni sumudan. People living at seaside, what do they do to survive? Stanza 89 by Shōhaku, Autumn, Sihen, the Thai form, Tabi. Akikaze no arai somakura fushi wabinu. With the autumn wind and a rough beach for a pillow, I despair of sleep. Stanza 90 by Sōgi, Autumn, Tori, Sandri, the Thai version, Thai form, Hikarimono, Yabun. Kari naku yama no tsuki fukuru sora. Wild geese cry from the mountains, the moon sinking in the sky. Stanza 91 by Sōchō, Autumn, Kusa, Furimono. Kohagihara, utsuro tsuyu mo asu yamimu. Tomorrow I'll watch as the dewdrops disappear from bush clover. Stanza 92 by Shōhaku, no season, Jinding. Ada no o no o kokoro naru hito. Like the fields of Adamor, so is the heart of that man. And that's the end of the front side of the nagori, the final sheet. And here now we have the final sheet, reverse side, called the nagori no ura, which holds the 8 verses, 8 stanzas of the final Q section, the rapid finale section, along with a record of the participants, the locations, and a date of composition, so forth. Starting with stanza 93 by Sōgi, no season, 10回。忘るなよ、限りや変わる夢うつつ。You must not forget that we promise to the end, dream, or reality. Stanza 94 by Sōchō, no season, 10回。思えばいつをいにしえにせん。I think but no longer know what I mean by long ago. Stanza 95 by Shōhaku, no season, 写経。仏たち隠れてはまたいずるように。One Buddha leaves us for another to appear in this world of ours. Stanza 96 by Sōgi, Spring, Uemono, 写経。枯し林も春風ぞ吹く。A grove of withered trees, yet even here spring winds blow. Stanza 97 by Sōchō, Spring, Sanri, Furimono. Yama wa kesa, iku shimoyo nika kasumu ran. Mountains at morning, but how many frosty nights preceded the haze? Stanza 98 by Shōhaku, Spring, Sobikimono, Kyosho, the Thai form. Keburi no doka ni miyuru kari yo. Smoke makes for a peaceful scene around a makeshift hut. Stanza 99, the penultimate verse of the 100-verse sequence by Sōgi, no season, Jinrin. Iyashiki mo miyo osamuru wa aritsu beshi. Among the low-born too must be some who spend their time in tranquility. And stanza 100 by Sōchō, no season, Jinrin. Hito ni oshinabe michi zo tadashiki. For all men everywhere, the way lies straight ahead.